really all
But nothing in a PDF other than or in the email. Really all that sheet just said old business, public discussion, just the agenda.
The agenda, and there were a couple things behind it, like a new definition for accessory dwelling.
Got it.
I just passed out a few things tonight, George, and I'll go over them.
Okay.
To introduce, and we actually, Bill, I was talking to Victor, we kind of had a lot of things that we did last minute here that weren't part of the agenda. Normally, we should have probably had all these things in it as part of the packet. So we're gonna create a new thing, add it as an addendum so that, you know, anybody that's watching it after will be able to have access to these documents.
Oh, great, thank you. Thanks. Thanks.
Sit in one of the chairs outside, so we.
Oh, I'll have to do that. Yeah, those are beautiful too.
Oh, shoot. I need to print out a copy.
Emily, how are you? Are these chairs new?
No.
No? I don't know if they're.
Maybe they were clean.
I don't know if they're being blue. I was thinking they were gray, like a dark gray.
How you doing, Bill?
That's because I haven't been in here. I was like, it's been
You
a
don't know
couple
yet?
weeks.
Oh, I said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Didn't know it really.
All the gunfire in the airport, you know, I lost my hearing.
Got some of that too.
He had sworn that he got that age, because he conversation about the other time.
The sports club up on Route. Oh, well, nice to meet you. Yeah, it is. I like to go.
We would send them, you know.
Yeah, well, is that you now? Just making sure.
Yeah, good question.
Oh, it's perfect.
How you doing, Nick?
Not too bad, how are you?
Good, I haven't seen you out there golfing at all, so.
No, I haven't been able to make it back.
Okay.
Bought a new house, so.
Oh, you got pretty good.
Doing all the
Where at?
Country club.
Where?
Country club road.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so doing all the home repair.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah,
Think
so
about that.
get married and now I gotta change everything, fix everything up, repaint, so everything's all as much as I want.
Don't oversleep. You end up looking like me one day and then looking like him the next.
So is that?
I don't have any mirrors in my house. I have no idea.
I got a lot of mirrors. There's mirrors everywhere.
I got divorced and left everything in this place and now it's coming along down my ex-wife. Well, you're trying to ask me something right away. No, if you move in, well, put all that stuff in the building. I said,
Is Sue Winter, is that the guy who comes once in a while with the?
Yes.
We're wrapping it up there anyway, so.
Nice guy.
Oh, when you guys close?
Yeah.
Pretty fit.
Right up.
Yeah.
We got some good weather. Yeah, all the reasons.
She's out there in a kayak.
Good for her.
Yeah, everything was flooded.
Yeah.
And that was, and then the last golf course we played was the Loon over in Gator. And the bridge was closed because I guess it's, when it rains, it just is terrible, it's impassable. because
Yeah.
Everything's flooded.
Yeah.
See, there was a lot of swamp here, you know. Now, where you were, that is still high up, you don't look
Did you hear from Max?
Max has a tennis meet tonight, so he won't be able to make the meeting, but he did indicate that this is the last one of the season, and so he should be at future meetings.
Great. And we have him again until the end of
End of the school year.
the school year. Great. High school kids sitting in these meetings. Max is our high school. But he has a veteran school. Now.
So we should probably get rid of this one. We try to get this.
Mark, Bidet, Gary, let's go.
Who said he would have turned?
So, yeah, they got 2 or 3 minutes. I've been monitoring the state website and there's been no update yet, so they did have a session today though. So,
We'll brief everybody on that.
hello. I am.
Plenty of time, see?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I thought I was late.
It's fair.
It's how you make an entry. Next time you do that, we'll have the royal trumpeter do that. Please do.
He's leaving, so.
All right, it's 5:30, so let's call this meeting to order. And this is a special meeting of the Planning Commission of the City of Harbor Springs. Today is, what is today? Thursday, September 29th, 2022. Great. And Jeff, can you take roll for us, please?
Absolutely. Rick Tarczynski.
Here.
Vanessa Warren.
Here.
Emily DeBay.
Here.
Bob Thoma.
Here.
George Pete.
Here.
Bill Mulder.
Here.
Al Dyke.
Here.
Mark Bidet and Barry are not here. We do have a quorum.
We have a quorum, great. Well, on the agenda tonight, we have two topics. One is short-term rentals, two is accessory dwelling units / guest quarters. And these are the two topics that we couldn't get to at the last meeting because we were working on the yeah, I was trying to think what it was officially called, Zorn Park site plan review. And so that's why we're here tonight. Thank you for coming out. Members of the public, thank you for coming out and attending tonight. Appreciate that. And folks online, looks like Matt. Hello, Matt. And next thing on the agenda, since we don't have notes from the last meeting yet, we'll have those at the next meeting, is public comment or correspondence on anything that's not on the agenda. Mr. Potter.
2 minutes and 50 seconds. Andy Potter, 815 Ottawa. Immediately following your last planning commission meeting, City of Harbor Springs Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals member Bob Toma approached me stating, the next time you step up to do a woman's job, you should just step up and be the man instead of being a woman, you gutless fuck. The statement was made with police officer Tyler Huff and Councilman John Cups Jr. being present. I can only assume his verbal attack and threatening posture was made because of my public statement directed at the Planning Commission meeting of September 15, 2022. Commissioner Toma's threatening posture, red face, angry facial expressions, and hostile voice tone caused me great concern for my personal safety as well as the personal safety of my family, that a police threats report was immediately filed with the Harbor Springs Police Department. I have also asked the police department to make extra patrols of my home to deter Commissioner Toma from additional attacks, hostile or threatening action. Before the Planning Commission meeting, I have never had a conversation with Commissioner Toma. I do not know Commissioner Toma, only hearing information through the grapevine. Commissioner Toma has a propensity to be hostile toward anyone with an opposing view. The last time I attended a City Planning Commission meeting was in March of 2021. Many planning commissioners, like that of Commissioner Toma, I do not know or have ever met. The actions of Commissioner Toma are more disturbing than just an unacceptable display of hostile and threatening behavior of a public official in a public place after a public meeting toward a resident of Harbor Springs. Commissioner Toma's belief that this type of behavior is acceptable is disturbing in itself. Commissioner Toma's hostile action toward a resident with a perceived and opposing viewpoints after a meeting specifically designed for public input invalidates his position on the Planning Commission as an impartial participant. Commissioner Toma's statement invalidates his position on PC member and negates the work and value of the Harbor Springs Planning Commission. Because you are a Planning Commission member, you should be reminded that section 125.3815 of the Planning Enabling Act, which states that only 2 members of the Planning Commission can be non-electors of the city or village. Bob Toma was not an elector of the city of Harbor Springs when he was appointed sometime in January 2022, with records reflecting he was a registered voter of Little Traverse Township. The address Toma uses in his Harbor Springs address shows a 501 Pfeffer Street. A public tax record shows on the Emmett County website that 501 Pfeffer is registered to a Robert and Maureen Toma, of which also displays delinquent tax records for that property for 2020 and 2021. Bob Toma's continued presence on the Planning Commission will deter future public input, especially from our resident female populations. Bob Toma should not be the face of Harbor Springs, let alone representing the Harbor Springs on our Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments? Okay. Great. First order of business then is short-term rentals. We're not asking you to.
I won't dirty you people with this, I'm sorry.
All right. Do we still have a quorum?
We do.
Great. Okay, short-term rentals is the topic, important topic. One that we couldn't get to last time. And Jeff, would you like to give us an update on where we stand on this right now?
Absolutely. So first, let me point out, there was the short-term rental application evaluation that was included in the packet. You have a slightly revised copy of that on your desk. The only change is the first line where previously it said residence of property owner. We have changed that to be distance of local agent to the property. We reviewed this with Jim Raymer, and he had a concern about how defensible that would be if it was challenged. And by making this modification in reference to the local agent and distance to the property, that would be something more defensible if this were challenged.
So the lawyer has looked at this.
The lawyer has looked at this. That was the only thing he had an issue with, and so we modified that. He no longer has any concerns with the use of this, or if it were to be challenged, he feels that it would be more defensible. The idea of this document, as we talked about before, was with the thought of creating a limitation on the number of short-term licenses that would be available. We needed a defensible set of criteria on how we would determine who we would issue the licenses to. So we came up with these things based on discussion at previous planning commission meetings, the idea of some inspection criteria, some other things like that. We put together this point system to come up with these things. The idea would be that there would be a minimum point score required to qualify, and that furthermore, that licenses would be issued first to people that had a higher point total. So if we had, we've talked about a potential limit of 40 licenses available. If we had 60 applicants, then we would look at the highest ones that had the most points. We would issue licenses to those in that order until we ran out of licenses, and then we wouldn't have any more to issue. Also at the last meeting, there was a request to outline what this process might look from start to finish for how this would go. So if you look, there's a memo that I drafted on September 26th that talks about that. Basically, I just kind of run through the whole process to somewhat as it exists today, but how it would be modified, taking into consideration the idea of limiting licenses. With that, we did a couple changes. One, we split the application cost into two parts. We also placed kind of an application deadline to receive applications by. And the idea then was that we would then review all of the applications received by a certain date. And that would be the date that we would assign points to them and go through and pick the properties that would be awarded the licenses. So there are some items in red here that really I kind of put in as placeholders. So that we had something to go by to start a conversation, but by all means, those are things that we should discuss and determine what's best appropriate. Some of them, Planning Commission, I think, should offer some opinions and thoughts on. Some of the things with the fees are probably more for City Council to decide. But I'll briefly run through this. The idea would be that by a certain point in time, let's say February 1st of the year, that applications would need to be submitted to city staff along with various information. And that information would be the application and some of the other documents needed to be able to go through the evaluation form and assign points based on the criteria that we're able to come up with there. At that point in time, for all applicants, because there is time involved in reviewing that and going through all of those applications and assigning points, that all applications at that point would pay a fee of, let's say, $100. Then after that, staff would review the applications, we would process them. We would set a date where we would probably meet with, we have the short-term rental board that where we review complaints and things like that. I think it would be most appropriate if that board then sat down, looked at all the scoring sheets, went through and said, we have 40 licenses to issue, and use the evaluation process to pick what 40 properties would be assigned or offered a short-term rental license. This is, of course, I guess, let me back up one second. We're not discussing properties within business districts like B1 or Central Business District. This process would be for properties within single-family residential zones where we've talked about creating a limitation. Once that board chose the 40 properties that would be offered licenses, we would reach out to those 40 properties. We would offer them that license. At that time, those eligible applicants that choose to take a license, there would be a follow-up fee for the license itself. We're talking about a dramatic reduction or somewhat dramatic reduction in the number of licenses. The cost to implement short-term rentals is not going to go down. It potentially may go up with the higher level of enforcement that this is going to require. Based on that, we felt that an increase in the final fee would be appropriate. So that's why previously last year, the fee for this was $400. That was split between roughly 80 to 85 applications that paid for the processing and all the Harmari and other, the resources that we had to use to, monitor short-term rental access. So by increasing this cost between the $100 initial fee and then the $750 follow-up fee, we feel that will adjust and still create the necessary, revenue to pay for the cost of this process. Once that's done, we would, obviously reach out to them, offer them the license. They would then pay the follow-up fee. Once we've identified the 40 properties that would receive the license, we would then contact the other applicants to let them know that all licenses were issued and there weren't any licenses left for them. Therefore, they aren't able to operate their short-term rental for that year. Also, just a couple notes there about follow-up for any potential violations that we might find and how we would handle that, provide them a short window of opportunity where we would contact them and let them voluntarily shut down their operations before we proceeded any legal action, which would be basically a citation from the police department. So that kind of outlines that process.
They would be able to see this, so let's just say
Yep.
somebody didn't get it one year, they could get their scorecard and see how they could maybe improve their score the following year.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So my thought is that once we finalize and have all of this worked out, all of this information would be part of the packet. When somebody came in and asked for a short-term rental application, they would receive all of this information, including the final version of this memo,
Okay.
so that they have a full understanding of what they need to do to have the best potential outcome to be awarded one of the 40 licenses.
So if I'm Tom Graham, do I submit a batch of all of the houses that Graham Real Estate manages all at once on January 1st?
Yes.
And now, is that entirely fair? Like they're, they're a management company, all of their properties are going to tick all of these boxes. They'll make sure of it. And then, all of their applications are going to be submitted in one batch right away. They'll have someone here. Is there a way, like, what if they gobble up 25 of these right away? Have we given any thought to that?
Well, I don't think that they're going to have any unfair advantage or disadvantage compared to any other property owner. They're going to, bundle this all up together and submit it probably as one package deal initially. But the end result is we're still going to go through parcel by parcel and do this score sheet for each and every property. Now, because they are a local agent that's within the city of Harbor Springs, they're going to get a good point system there. They're probably going to do their best to make sure that an applicant has checked off as many boxes on here to get the best possible points. But any applicant, I think, has those same abilities, right? Nothing on this sheet is really, tremendously difficult to do. In actuality, I think the last 7 of this, from the annual inspection and the items that kind of coincide with that, with the smoke detectors, the carbon monoxide detectors, the fire extinguisher, property taxes being paid, and proof of insurance, those are kind of all gimmies. If somebody has done those things, which are virtually gimmies, they're at 70 points right there. The real ones that I think are to some extent out of the hands of the applicant is parking status. You know, they're kind of locked into what parking they have or don't have. Status of complaints, whether we've received very many complaints. And again, I should specify that those are verified complaints. If it's a complaint and we're not able to verify that it's actual, I don't think that we can really hold that against the property owner. Distance to local agent, again, that's a choice that property owner has of how they want to handle that. And that whole goal.
And screening as well.
Yeah, screening is something, but again, depending on the property owner and what they choose to do, they can put in screening to help with that, which will help neighbors with their issues. You know, some property owners that have had issues with their neighbors that are operating short-term rentals have opted to put in their own screening to help with the situation.
So there are new condominiums going up by my house. How do we manage, what do we think it looks like if someone who owns one of those condos gets a license? Or do we allow multiple licenses in one condominium unit? How do you see that happening?
I think the best way to approach this is a license is applicable for a dwelling unit. Would be my thought of how we would administer this. So if there's a property that has multiple dwelling units on it, I think it makes sense that they would need a license per dwelling unit. If there's enough available, then they might be able to get them for all of them. If there's only 2 licenses left available and they have 3 dwelling units, they might have to pick which ones they're going to do. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Or
And these condominiums are in the residential zoning?
Yeah,
Are they really?
yeah, they're over on west. They're on Second Street, right?
which condo units are
Second or
they?
third. I think they're on Second Street. They're up on the hill in between Second and Third.
Oh, so those are single family homes. It's condominiumized, but each lot is let's
They're a
say,
single family
yeah,
home.
those are single family
Yeah.
homes. Yeah,
Okay.
where they have their own drive-in. I think it's called Harbor Cottages.
Yeah, it's the one where they came in for the special land use.
Correct, because of the hill,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
So that's a driveway going in. There's 10 units within there. But then each lot or unit, they have to build a single family home on. So each of those buildings, there aren't multiple units within them. Rick?
The application process is gonna run from January to February.
That's my proposal in here. My thought there is twofold. One, it provides a deadline that creates time where we can get all of these in, we can receive them. And then we can sit down at one meeting and determine where the 40 short-term rentals are going to be.
Okay, well, my question is, how do we handle the short-term rental people that are renting for skiers in January?
So this will be for, I imagine, will be a 1-year lease. So if the lease goes in effect March 1st, they'll run through March 1st of the next year. And we're just, reviewing the applications for the following year in that period.
What's the tiebreaker?
The tiebreaker would be date that was submitted. If we receive 50 applications, we're gonna award it based on points first. If we get down to where there's only 5 licenses available and 7 applications left, or that have the same number of points, I think based on whoever submitted their applications first would be a tiebreaker. I think I may have noted that on here. I may not
I'm
have.
sorry if I missed it.
I know it was discussed. I don't know if I included it on the document, but I can certainly add that.
Any idea as to what the fine would be for not having a license but renting a house?
I think that's something that we need to adjust. The fine as it is right now is, I think, about $200 or $250 for the first offense, with $400 as the fine for the second offense. Obviously, If the fine is lower than the cost of the license, that doesn't work.
Right.
So I think it would be appropriate that we would adjust what those fines were to be more in line.
I think it needs to be pretty severe.
Yeah,
Well, part of this is also the way the way we're set up to deal with civil infractions. And Jim Raymer, our attorney, has discussed whether we would want to form our own municipal bureau of, I forget what it's called, but for us to handle fines and tickets in-house. Because right now, if we find someone, they go to the county and the county gets the money for it, right? So there may be different ways to deal with that, but a lot of our fines are determined by what, would be appropriate for going to county to get a first offense. So it's something we do need to work on. However, we also have the other provision in our code here, though, that they get a suspension hearing too. And so if the suspension hearing could revoke their license, so not only would they get fined, but potentially they could have their license revoked. So the fine might not be,
Or presuming they're getting a fine because they don't have a license.
yeah, but we could still have the ability to never issue them a license, and then they would, so either way, you end up in court, either way.
That is the one, I guess, downside. It's not necessarily a reason that we shouldn't do it, but we should be cognizant of the fact that there will most likely be situations, and I'm stating this from discussion with planning, the planning people for City of Petoskey and Charlevoix and other communities that have limited the license in areas, and they have spent time in the court system for that enforcement, and so that there will be some costs there, which we have to be aware of that fact. Hopefully, we'll have money from the fees to help pay for some of that cost.
I'll back up a minute with my commentary. My biggest overall concern with all of this stuff is that venture capital groups, things like that, come in and start buying up these houses. And if you have a big corporation who owns a couple of these houses, it's still profitable for them to pay and to litigate and to do whatever if they've got houses they can rent for $8,000-$10,000 a week. And they can just crank that thing out from end of May until October now. It's beautiful outside. This is climate change. We've got another 3 weeks in our season now. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with most of my questions.
Okay. Thanks for that summary, Jeff. Just to do a reset for everybody regarding the state legislative activity, something happened yesterday. And so where we stand on the state business is that the House passed a version of a bill which would forbid municipalities from regulating short-term rentals through zoning means, and that municipalities would only have that ability once short-term rentals reach 30+% of their housing units. That's a very high number. And so the House has passed that. That's been a similar bill, exact same wording has been in a Senate committee. Doesn't matter what committee it's in. And it just popped out yesterday. And they referred it, that's the verb, to the full Senate. And it was a vote of 6-3 positive to refer that to the Senate. So now it may be acted on by the Michigan Senate, or it may not. So this doesn't really change where we've been. We've had this, possibility hanging over us, and we've decided to go ahead anyway and get our thoughts together and our recommendation about a course of action. The Senate does not meet again until October 11th, 12th, and 13th, and then that's it until the election. And then they have a bunch of dates where they can cram a whole lot of stuff through after the election, if they want to. The other thing is we still don't really know where the governor stands on this. She would need to sign it for it to take effect. So I don't think it changes anything in terms of our work here. I say we go forward and get our thoughts lined up and make a recommendation to council if we think we're going to do that. Okay, why don't we open it up for some public comment at this point? And why don't we go online to Mr. Wehrman?
Hi, everybody. Am I permitted to ask a question before my time starts as it relates
Sure.
to something that
Sure, go
was
ahead. Yep.
changed on the form? The owner residency requirement on the scorecard, are you able to define in more detail what those scores would be, like number of miles or driving distance or whatever? Because that was going to be one of my comments and I won't have to make it if I'd like the detail on it if it's possible.
Yeah, so the idea is distance of the local agent to the property. If the local agent is within the city of Harbor Springs, they would get a full 10 points. If the local agent is within Emmett County but not within the city of Harbor Springs, they would get 5. If the local agent is within the state of Michigan but not Emmett County, they would get 1 point. And if the local agent is out of state, they would get 0 points.
Great, thank you. In that case, they're not local, right?
Right.
And it's not the owner, Matt.
Well,
Right,
so
right.
to clarify that they're now local, we've had people put themselves as local agents who are out of state because they said that they would be available by phone immediately, and then they would call their person in town to go fix something or address a concern. So we
I
have
see.
had people, so even though the word local, it contradicts the word local, but we've had people put themselves as local agents. We didn't
Gotcha.
have local defined in the previous ordinance.
Gotcha. Okay, that all makes sense. Thank you. All right. So yeah, my comments. I'm Matt Wehrman. Hi, everybody. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and 161 East Summit Street. By that, I mean our primary residence, according to the IRS, is out of state, but we consider Harbor Springs a home of equal prominence to us. I was a Harbor High class of '89 graduate. We've had our place for 22 years there. And my wife, Jill, and I plan to be there full time as soon as we can. All this to say, we do care deeply about the community and plan for it to be part of our life, forever. We do have a small home listed on Airbnb adjacent to our cottage. And we bought it as a guest house and also to protect the lot from larger development when it went up for sale by our neighbor who was a friend of ours. And over time, we decided to rent it when we're not there. It has been licensed by the city since licensing was a thing. We are supportive of having some rules on STRs, but we had some comments on some of the items in the proposed scorecard. First, I wanted to ask a question on the record in hopes that the commission can answer it in discussion. I do recall there are around 1,100 housing units in the residential zone in town. And this means that the target of 40 to 45 is only around 4 to 5% of inventory. And I was just wondering if the council could, or if the commission can answer what is driving that target of 40 to 45, just because it seems very restrictive to me. Second, I did have a comment on owner residence, which I won't get into because I think the solution is fair that you proposed. The second one is the screening of rear and side yards requirement. And I feel that having a preference for full opaque screening may have a negative effect. And the reason is fencing doesn't work for all properties and can be unsightly and awkward in many cases. For example, our backyard flows into two neighbors' backyards. It kind of forms an open field of sorts with a view across the properties, allowing for a flow of wildlife, sunlight, et cetera. We, congregate with neighbors out there and everything. And I'm not sure anyone would want a 6-foot fence put up there. Incentivizing this for rentals may prompt a lot of ugly barriers put up around the small lots in our scenic town. Plus, fences everywhere don't exactly foster the friendly look or character I'd think we'd want in our community. I'm also just not sure what problem it solves when you don't have complaints from your neighbors. We also have a couple of suggestions for things that might be considered instead. One is past performance, so rewarding a track record of following the rules and not causing any problems while providing a quality place for visitors to stay, enjoy our town, and support the local economy. Perhaps even using the ratings systems on their platforms like Airbnb. If someone has been providing a nice rental and not causing problems, it would seem unfair to threaten that license in a new year or annually. The second one is neighbor feedback. If one of the reasons for STR restrictions is disruption in the neighborhoods, perhaps some consideration should be given to feedback from neighbors in surrounding properties, maybe references from the neighbors. And with a little time, I just have a couple of other questions for the record. One, I was just wondering if there's has been an update on the efforts to crack down on properties that are not licensed, that are in the enforcement zone. And then the second one has already been answered. It was about other channels of rentals like grant management, and you've answered that will be treated in the same way, which I think is fair. So those are my comments. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Warman, and thank you for your letters and very thoughtful, well-done letters. They've been very helpful. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm happy to be involved in any way I can.
Anyone else like to comment? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Ashley O'Reilly. I'm Matt's neighbor. I have to say he's a great renter. He runs a very nice Airbnb. I think it's Airbnb. Matt, can you hear me? We've been.
I can. Hi, Ashley.
Hi. We chatted this morning a little bit on email, and I let him know what it was like living by a short-term rental, although his is very good. Folks are very nice that he has, but it pokes holes in the neighborhood a little bit. And I walk in my backyard and I never know who's gonna be standing on the balcony there. So I'm pleased that it will be limited a little bit, but I do agree with Matt that those who are doing a great job, who are very considerate, should somehow be rewarded in some way, that they should be able to continue also. And one other question I had is, it's no longer a short-term rental if they rent for 31 days to one person, right? Correct. So people who want to still rent their places still can, and they don't have to apply for a short-term license. They can go ahead and rent it month by month, a month at a time if they want it. And then they would get around all of these kinds of things. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Bye, Matt.
Thank you, Ms. O'Reilly. Ms. Winter.
Yeah, I'm Sue Winter, on State Street, and I mean, we're zoned residential. And I don't know when the city decided when that decision was made and why to allow businesses. And I don't know if there's ever a strong discussion on that or community input asked for, but we are residential, and I don't know why anybody would want to have a business next door to them. And I'm an all or nothing. If it's good for our community to have short-term rentals, there shouldn't be a limit. Let's just gung ho have them and turn it into a community, tourist community. And if they're not good, why are we allowing any of them? It makes no sense. They're either good or bad. And it really does, affect our neighborhood. This summer, honestly, it was like I thought I was living on Main Street. Just groups of people that you don't know changing over every week. This isn't a neighborhood. I live on a busy, Main Street. And I've been here for 32 years. So there's an intense change going on in town, and it doesn't seem like the master plan has really addressed that. Like, what do we really want? They've never used the term short-term rentals. I just
Actually, that is in there.
Is short-term rental in their bill?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for correcting me. But not a real direction. It didn't seem like it gave a direction on what was the master plan wanted. I guess I'm an all or nothing. We're losing our community, and many other towns have gone through this. Many of them have stepped back. And if you do go towards this, which is better than nothing, how is it fair that some people have to live next door to mini hotels and others don't? You live near one?
Well, we had, like Matt said, I'm sorry, can I speak?
I guess I'm not supposed to talk to her, I'm sorry.
Right, talk to me.
We have someone in the audience who has to endure that, changing people every week. And maybe others have no short-term rentals on their street. Zoning should be the same for everyone. If I can't burn trash in my yard, nobody else can either. Why are you asking? It's not right that some people have to it should be equal for everyone. That's the all or nothing thing. But I don't know if my letter got included, but I had a lot of questions. And I think there's a lot of issues, like Jeff brought up, the distance or the manager's distance. Well, if I ever had a short-term rental and I had there's a manager in Sheboygan, I would immediately hire a new manager down the block. What's gonna stop somebody from doing that to get points? I mean, that's so easily overcome. There's managers out there that are happy to have your business. So that seems irrelevant, that factor. You could easily switch to. And I think I think I wrote in my letter, if like the fellow that was speaking, he has nice people come to his rental, but he's not in control of them. They can be really awful, and it's not his fault. Why should he be penalized? It's not fair because the city allows this to go on. So anyway, some of the other questions that I had might be answered in other discussions. I can't remember what they are because I didn't have my letter in front of me. So,
Yes, it was in the packet from 2
oh,
weeks ago.
good,
yeah.
okay, okay. Well, I forgot what some of the other ones were, but I think the grant management question is really good because they would be treated individually like everyone else. I don't think that would be a problem, I'm sure. If they're from owners from Kentucky, they get the points that, that they should get. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Ms. Winter. All right, any other public comment? I think we've heard from just about everybody in the room and online. All right, let's take it back to the commissioners. Anybody else have any comments or questions? And then I can tell you where I can bet on this if you care.
We've been beating on this for the summer now. Yeah. It's, I think they've come up with a pretty good package for us to consider. I don't think all of us are gonna always be happy. We've come a long way over the summer in discussing this and focusing and but we've got some clear constraints and criteria to judge. And I would at the very least get these in place. Let's get started with this. And like anything in government, you just keep tweaking it as you go along. So that's how I feel.
Thank you, Al. Rick,
I'm
share any thoughts?
sort of like Sue. I don't understand why we allow businesses in residential districts. It's upsetting for neighbors. It's ruining neighborhoods because they're no longer neighborhoods, they're hotel rooms. And the one thing that I think is missing on the form is some way to limit the number of short-term rentals in certain areas so that I don't end up with 5 in my yard and across the street, they don't have any. That's really putting a big burden on the people that are caught in the middle. So I think that's something that needs to be factored in, divide it up by blocks or something and just have so many per block so that it's not putting all the problems with one area. When you look at the cluster maps, there are places where there are numerous ones and then 2 blocks over, there's nothing. So we need to spread it out somehow is what I think.
Thank you. George?
I think Matt's points were really good, especially about the screening issue. There could really be some unintended consequences there. So, but first crack at it, I think Al's is spot on. We just got to get moving on this and get it out there. I would like to see something, to Rick's point about density. And, that's kind of where I was coming from with the condo unit comment. Because like West 3rd Street, West Fourth Street, kind of where I live, there are, there's a cluster of licensed short-term rentals, but there are 3 or 4 that are unlicensed that are going all the time, and it's dense, and it's going, and there's traffic, and there are people, and there's a lot of action. So I think perhaps something with the density, figure out a plan. I think that the screening portion on this evaluation is really good. But we just need to use some common sense and keep in mind, sort of what neighborhood we're looking at. Is it a neighborhood like where I live, where a lot of people do have big fences and hedges, or is it like where these guys live on Summit Street, where there are a lot of open yards, and use our best judgment? I don't really know how that works in your office, but that's what I would propose. And then make sure that we've got this, the fines type of thing nailed down, so that these people know this is for real, and we take it seriously in our community.
Thank you, Drew. Vanessa?
Yeah, I support this. I'm very sensitive to not having any of it, but I would rather have something than nothing.
Some restriction.
Yes, I'd rather start somewhere.
Emily?
I think this is a great starting point, the evaluation. I don't think there should be any, I kind of agree and disagree with the screening part. I don't think we should be able to tell anybody what they should do with their yard. I mean, you don't tell just a regular resident like that they need to have a hedge or not have a hedge to block certain views or whatever. So I don't feel like that should be a part of one of the factors. I do agree with some of Matt's ideas too, with past performance and feedback. I think is nice to hear if we know that they've been a good renter in the past. I think that's important to know, and then maybe you should get points for that as well. And let's see what else I wrote that's about. Yeah, and density too. I feel like there is a way to see how many are in an area. I can understand people's feelings on that too. So I think that's pretty much it.
Is it ever prudent, or is it ever a thing where you would consider, say someone next door to me submitted an application, would it be too much if the city sent out a notification to one house on each side, the immediate
Yes.
neighbors, that, hey, these people are applying for this license. Have there been any issues, or at least, then there's a heads up? Is that, or too much?
Bill, do you mind if I address that comment and then some of these other comments that have been made?
I'll jump right in.
My concern with asking the neighbors if there have been any issues. Not that I don't want to hear from neighbors,
Everybody
right?
shows up stomping their feet.
But now we're receiving comments and we really can't verify whether that complaint is a legitimate complaint or a generic complaint that can't be verified, right? If we get a call that there's noise or there's some issue going on and it's at that time, and we can send a police officer down to verify it, and that police officer says, yes, there was a noise issue. That's a verified complaint, right? If we hear 6 months after the fact, it was noisy there, how can we verify whether that's legitimate or whether that property owner just doesn't like short-term rentals and he's just gonna say something negative just because, right? And not to say that their opinion isn't, worth hearing. I do like the idea of, I don't remember if it was Matt or someone here that said, if the applicant submits letters of recommendation from their neighbors. If that property owner that wants to do a short-term rental has letters of recommendation from all of his neighboring properties, that they're in favor of it and they don't mind that going on, I think that tells a good story.
I think that also puts, I agree, I think that puts the onus on the applicant instead of the city to go out there and
Right.
try to, discuss with the neighbors if,
Right.
and you could have, instead of the screening, if we're concerned about the screening of rear yards and side yards is causing problems, you could theoretically put neighbor references and.
Yeah. We included screening because we did have some potential issues with spillover of short-term rental use onto neighboring properties. We had a property owner that contacted us that the short-term renters were actually parking in his driveway and crossing through his lawn to get to the short-term rental because it was somehow easier for them. And that was an issue. And so I think the idea of screening, and it doesn't mean that it has to be a 6-foot fence. It doesn't mean that it has to be anything solid. It could be bushes. It could, there's a lot of different ways that you can achieve some type of screening. If you guys feel that that's not appropriate, we can certainly take it out. Emily, you mentioned that we don't require that. I would counter that we have a lot of language in the zoning code that when we have a higher intensity of use near a lower intensity of use, we frequently require screening between those uses to protect that lower intensity use from the higher.
Okay, that's good to know.
Great examples of that are where you have commercial businesses that are adjacent to single family residential homes. So it's not uncommon that we have that, but that screening could be in many different ways. It could be a 6-foot fence or whatever we permit for fence heights in that area. It could be bushes, vegetation, arborvitae, something like that. But that language could be removed. We did try and address past performance, as Matt mentioned, and that's in our status of complaints thing. If how else can we truly measure defensively performance of a short-term rental? And that's in verified complaints from property owners of issues that we've had with that site. So we tried to take that into consideration in that manner there. We had a good long discussion. Victor and I sat down with John Icoangeli, and when we were putting this together and we were looking at the things that we could try and include and not include, we really discussed location and proximity to other short-term rentals to come up with a way that we could try and limit the ability where if this property, so that this one house doesn't have 4 around them. The problem that we have is, I think, really a logistics one from how we would even do that here. We don't really have the software or the staff to really be able to implement that in a measurable way that was workable. If we slowed the process down and moved this to a special land use request, where we were entertaining each applicant individually through that special land use request process, then we can, because at the time we could say, and here are all the ones around this one. But that would dramatically slow the process down to where each applicant would have to come before the planning commission for a special land use request. But the other side effect of that would be, once that's approved, that runs in perpetuity with that land forever, and it can't be taken away. So that creates a whole nother issue, and I don't know that we want to address it in that manner. So that was really the difficulty in trying to implement some type of way to measure how many there are within a reasonable proximity. If we had more software, if we had more staff, that might be something that's doable in the future. At this time, I just don't think that we have the means to be able to do that. And we really talked about that quite a bit. Just to provide thoughts of why we included some of the things on here and why we didn't include others.
I do find it interesting that the screening is in here, because you do require screening where there's different uses, but yet there's not supposed to be different uses. It's all supposed to be residential, and so we're kind of saying now it's not, it's commercial, so.
Right, good discussion.
Can I throw something in that might be helpful? Just, I know it's out of process, but it's related to the whole thing about neighbors' recommendations.
Sure.
Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, which is obviously a much larger problem to tackle is also requiring STR licenses. And one of the things that they're including in their licensing process is not references from the neighbors or approval of the neighbors, but proof of notification of the neighbors. So the applicant has to notify any neighbor that is an adjacent lot to their short-term rental that they are intending to use it as a short-term rental when they put their application in. Just might be a useful reference point.
That is useful. Thank you. All right. I think, why don't let's just talk about the scorecard for a minute, then I'll give you my overall take on this thing. Who would be in favor of substituting neighbor support or neighbor recommendation in place of the screening aspect, if this thing were to go forward? People like that?
Yeah, that would be fine.
I'd be in favor of that.
Could be hard to get, and someone who could get it would stand out as, so, okay. So let's consider that the scorecard, if we were to go forward with this recommendation, would substitute neighbor support or neighbor recommendation for instead of screening. All right, where I come down on this thing is this is really serious business. This affects a lot of people. It really affects property owners who need and want to rent their property. I'm very sensitive to that. I'm really sensitive to people who have concerns about the change of the character of residential neighborhoods and how it feels like a completely different use. One of the questions Mr. Warman had was about the number, and the background on this thing is that we benchmarked a number of resort communities on Lake Michigan all up and down the state, and came up with, we derived 40 or 45 number as approximately the similar kind of density that they've approved and that they felt good about. In particular, Charlevoix allows 80 in residential neighborhoods, and their population is about double of ours. So that was the basis. We don't know if the number's right. We don't know if the number's wrong. And the way that we've got this thing structured is it's not going to satisfy people who want a complete elimination of short-term rentals. It's not going to satisfy every property owner that wants to rent their property. So it's kind of a middle of the road approach. I see it as a starting point. It's measured. It looks like it's defensible. It looks like it's fair with a scorecard. I think it's a good place to start. It also addresses people's vivid fears about short-term rentals taking over the whole town, to some very high percentage. And so it does set that limit. Whether or not we'll be able to keep it, that's what the state does. I think it is valuable there. It does create more administration, which I don't like. The fee feels kind of high, $750 for the people who get it, but we do have to cover our costs. So I guess I could accept that. So in short, I would support this thing with the scorecard and the way that we've got it structured right now in a limit of 40 or 45. And I think it would make sense to pass it on to council. They may have a completely different view. They may tweak this thing. They could set a different number. They could set different fees. They could change the scorecard. We don't know. But I think it's worth passing on. We told them that we would give it a thorough review and we would come up with the best plan that we could. And I think we can do that. And I would support passing this through as modified here. Victor, what do we need if we wanted to pass this on back to city council at this point?
Well, it would be a motion, a vote to move forward the, basically the scorecard, the score sheet, the process that we've.
In the application process.
Because this is not a zoning code change, it's a code to the change to the city code that it's, there really needs, it doesn't need to be a vote at the planning commission to change any ordinance, but a vote to pass it to council as amended. And we're not worried, like Jeff said earlier, about the fines. That's something that staff will work on that and we'll present to council what fines are, what the fees are, would be, but really you guys here are talking just about the substance of the policy here of the scorecard. It makes sense.
All right. Planning commissioners, any more comments before we bring it to a vote?
Oh,
If
and we need a
someone would like to
number.
make a motion?
We need a number of short.
If I could just ask
Oh,
for one thing, you know, setting the actual number, we put in 40 as a placeholder because that's what we've talked about. Also, your thoughts on the dates for the deadline. If I have in here, February 1st would be the deadline for submission of the application. And then we have February 28th as our day when staff would sit down and determine who the 40 licenses would go to. If you see any, if you like those dates, or if you think that that's not manageable, or if you think that it needs to be changed.
Let's do one at a time.
Okay.
Commissioners, how do you feel about the number of licenses? What's your preference?
I feel like it's fair and good.
What number would you
40.
prefer?
40.
40.
40. Rick?
30.
So I feel like 45, but sounds like 40. So let's go with 40. And then in terms of the dates, does anybody have any feelings on that, or should we
I
just
feel
let
like it should
staff
be
decide?
shorter. Give them a week, just to, I mean, just, I feel like if they know ahead of like a whole month to, you know, it's not a big you're not applying to college, it's not a huge application. I feel like just, if they're really serious, they'd get it in.
Well, we might have it just made it a little more complex with the letters of recommendation.
Well, they can spend time getting those before
No.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, they
start
can
now.
do that whenever they want.
I would be a little concerned about making that deadline too short for fear that, let's say that somebody postmarks something on January 1st, but it takes 3 weeks for whatever reason to get here. We have seen at certain times of the year, especially during the beginning of COVID, where mail was significantly delayed. So I think that 1 month is sufficiently short.
Well, I don't know if we necessarily need to, we can talk about
We
it.
can
Yeah,
certainly
February
adjust that
28th,
as we
yeah.
need to, though.
We can look into that.
Yeah.
As a staff, that's.
Council may have an idea on that
Yeah.
too. You guys just bring the right recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's more of our wheelhouse administration.
All right. All right, any more comments, questions? Someone like to make a motion at this point?
Would we be going ahead with it as is or replacing the screening requirement?
Replacing the screen with a letter of recommendation or a letter of support from some neighbors. TBD on exactly how you guys.
We'll develop the
want
scoring
to define
system.
that.
When we say neighbors, are we talking like
Yeah.
adjacent neighbor or?
I'm thinking we let
I will.
staff define that and then,
We can define, we've defined different things differently, like sometimes neighbor has meant 300 feet radius from the house for purposes of special land use. So we could narrow down a number that we think is right and appropriate.
Okay.
It's really gonna be more about, I think, the scoring system, more about the percentage of neighbors. Like, let's say we calculate one house has 10 neighbors, but one only has 2. You know, obviously you can't say, well, this one has 10 letters of support, this one only has 2, so the one with 10 is much better, but probably be more around a percentage. And the problem we would get is, you know, do we start getting the weeds about the quality of that support? What if someone just writes, I support them, but what if someone writes like a 3-page article, love letter about their house and their short-term rental? I mean, we have to put some sort of limit on what we mean, but we'll figure that out. We'll take it to council, as long as the general idea is replace screening with some sort of neighbor support.
everybody comfortable with that? All right. Anyone care to make a motion?
I'll do that. That we pass this on to the city council with our tweaks to it and it's their turn.
Okay, I just thought of something. Al may vote on this in city council. So you may not be able to vote on this right here.
Yeah.
Well, the
And I think-
issue is he gets to vote on the issue once.
Yeah.
So he can choose whether he's gonna vote here or whether he's gonna vote on it at city council, right? I believe that's how it works.
Yeah, it is how it works.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Without him, do you still have quorum?
Pardon me?
Without him, do you still have quorum?
That's up to them.
To pass a motion at the planning commission requires 5 yes votes. So if everybody voted yes, then we would.
I'll vote here then.
Hmm?
I'll vote here.
Okay. So Al is making the motion.
You sure about that?
Okay, so how about I make the motion and you vote last? Or not?
Because last time there were only 2 council members or 3 council members who could vote on this topic.
Oh, that's right, huh? We're a pickle.
Okay, so I'll move to take this recommendation from the planning commission to the city council as amended with the screening and the language coming in from the support of the neighbors.
Okay. We have a motion to move this forward to city council. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Been seconded by George. Would you like to call roll, Jeff?
Can I vote on this?
That's your choice, I think.
But it's the same thing. If I vote now, I can't vote at the council.
Right, yeah, I believe that the planning, we can double check on this, but I'm pretty sure the Planning Enabling Act states that if you serve on both the planning commission and city council or planning commission and ZBA, that the situation is you can only voice your opinion and vote on one of the 2.
Does he have to disclose what he's going to do before the vote happens?
No, I don't think there's anything there.
So if we have the 5 votes, we don't need Al's vote and he can vote at council.
That's Al's decision. I'm not gonna provide advice on what to do one way or the other.
I think the right thing is for Al to decide in advance where he's gonna vote.
Yeah. The discussion may take more than 4 weeks at the
It
council
may.
table, and I'll be gone anyway.
It may.
So, I'll vote no.
Right.
I need affirmative.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
George Pete,
Yes.
Emily DeBay,
Yes.
Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Rick Tarczynski,
No,
Al Dyken.
Yes.
That is 5 yes votes, the motion passes.
All right, thank you everyone for your input.
You're
Very helpful. All right, moving on to the next topic, which is accessory dwelling units and or guest quarters. Where we are on this is that in your packet was some proposed wording from John and Becca Rader about accessory dwelling units. And he's took the tack of giving us some new definitions to put in our zoning. And he, for the first time, he's proposing we define accessory dwelling units and a dwelling mobile and a dwelling manufactured, and delete our definition of a mobile home. And he's also defining short-term rental. That's all because it would be called for in reference in the accessory dwelling unit definition, which he's proposing. Now, John couldn't be here tonight, which is too bad. He could have taken us through this. And this is a big deal going on in many municipalities around the world, or around the country. I think there's a lot of angles to it. And I've got a lot of questions about the language that John's proposed, how it would interact with things that we do today. Have you had a chance to take a look at it? Anybody have any comments on that?
If I can point out a couple things.
Yeah, sure, Jeff.
Realistically, to some extent, our guest quarters language is essentially accessory dwelling units. One key difference is in our definition of guest quarters, we specify that they are dwelling units in accessory buildings. And one difference that John has in his stuff is it looks like there's a spot where accessory dwelling units could be a smaller unit located, I think, we're attached to the principal building. So that's one difference there that's in his language that would be a change from what we've talked about. Realistically, it's just a different name for the same type of activity. I think he did point out in his that accessory dwelling units, it's more of a guarantee, or it's more recognized that an accessory dwelling unit would have all of the amenities that a dwelling unit would have: bathrooms, kitchen, facilities, things like that. Right now, our guest quarter description, it simply states that any space that would be upstairs above an accessory building, or any space that could be made habitable, shall be referred to as guest quarters and shall require special land use approval. So if somebody just wants to build a loft area where they're going to have storage up there, if it meets the requirements of the size category, that would be considered guest quarters. Now, the proposed language that Bill has, sorry, I should back up a second. Bill provided a document that I passed out to all of you as you want me to talk about that, or would you like to?
I'll explain what it's about.
All right, I'll let you get into that.
Okay.
But that's just kind of what some of the key differences between the language that we have and the language that John has proposed. And I think John is really just kind of addressing this more with the proper terminology that's more widely used. So.
Yeah, and so he's given us a first view of, what language could look like regarding accessory dwelling units, which is great. It is definitely something we're going to need to get into as we go through the whole zoning code. It's probably one of the biggest things we'll have to decide. And I looked at his wording, which is great, but I've actually still got a bunch of questions and a bunch of things that we might need to figure out. And it might be like, what's the definition of complete independent living facilities? Is that a full kitchen? Does that include a dishwasher? Does that include everything? Is it okay to build an accessory building with guest quarters above still? And then the biggest question I have is setbacks. I guess in this wording, accessory dwelling units would have to abide by the same setbacks for the principal structure, which is not the form that we necessarily have a lot of in the city. And it may not work. So, I mean, these are some thorny things that we're going to have to figure out. And the approval process, I don't see that defined. I don't know. That's a big deal. We might need some consideration on that. And then, separate metering for water and gas. We've actually forbidden that in the past. That's the exact opposite of what we do today. So that might require some discussion from us about what we want to incent and not incent. So anyway, what I came to is I think we've got some more work to do on this thing, and that we would hit this hard when we came around to it in the zoning code rewrite. And our discussion at our last meeting was, is there something we could do quickly that would help people rent maybe a few guest quarters long-term in the city to help some people find some housing, better housing situation before winter? And I think I see a shorter path to doing that if we're inclined to do that. And so I took today's code and I just marked it up and redlined it. And it looks to me like by deleting 2 paragraphs and adding a few words there in red, that we could really quickly and cleanly get to what we were talking about there. And I guess this proposal, the only thing it does is allows long-term rentals of 6 months or more. That's how I defined it. It could be a quick hit if we can get some public hearing, and if we want to go forward with it quickly. And there's another thing about it could allow some homeowners to age in place. That's a new trend where, if your caregiver could live in a guest quarter situation, it might be more appealing. You might be able to hire a better caregiver and have that person, on site and nearby. There's also the caretaker approach. So if owner wanted to leave for a while and have a caretaker on site, that could be very beneficial for them. There's no change in the special land use approval. So that's going to be a big deal that we're really going to have to talk through. So this preserves our existing process. It doesn't become any easier to build guest quarters. There's no change in the size or setbacks. and we still would forbid short-term rentals. So it looked to me like it could be a pretty quick path if we still think it's important to try to maybe get some additional rental opportunities for people, long-term rental opportunities for the city. And Jeff, what would be the process if we wanted to go forward with this?
I think the next step would be, and some of this could happen at the same time. Obviously, we would need to have this drafted up into kind of an ordinance form that would be put out for the public to review so that they could see the language that we're talking about. And we would have to schedule and provide notice for a public hearing. We could get that language drafted and made available so that when the notice was to the paper advertising for the public hearing, it would be available for the public to review. We could probably achieve that and set a public hearing for the following meeting of the Planning Commission. Actually, this is a special meeting, so I don't think that we would be able to have it done by our October meeting, but we could certainly have it ready and available. We could probably have the tentative wording in the ordinance form for the October 20th meeting. And then at that time, we could set a public hearing for the November 17th meeting. If we had wording that the Planning Commission liked, and they would then at that November 17th meeting, make a recommendation to move that to City Council to adopt the change to the zoning code. And then City Council would review that potentially November 21st, but more likely at a December meeting. So basically, we could probably, pending discussion and modification of wording, have it in place for 2023.
But we're gonna hold off on what John
Yes.
did until we go through.
That's
the
up to you,
zoning
but that's
board.
what I'm recommending, is it's gonna take a lot more study and a lot more thinking. And that this is just a pretty crisp adjustment to our existing zoning code.
Bill, I had a question about the language you chose.
Yeah.
Why did you choose for a period of less than 6 months? I guess how'd you come to that number?
Figuring the long-term rental should be 6 months or more.
My one thought was, we do have a lot of people here in the summertime for like 3 months, and they need a lot of help for living.
Yeah.
So that was my only concern there.
Yep, that wasn't the target I was envisioning. I was envisioning, year-round, really year-round people. But
Not say workers who would need to have a place to stay, to work here over the summer.
Yeah, basically, I mean, if they're here with their family and they want to rent out a place or what, I don't know. That was just a thought. I know, because that's been a big topic of concern for the last few years about shortage of places to live for the summer workers. But if that's not your target, it was just a thought I had about.
thank you. And I've got, does this require a vote or just a assent from us to say, let's put it
Well,
on?
right now, I don't think the vote would have to come until October 20th to approve the language, or even November.
I think if you're asking us to prepare language for an ordinance or whatnot to review, that would eventually then become a public hearing, we probably should have a motion to direct staff to draft that language.
Doesn't have to be specific.
Yeah, schedule
Yeah,
a public
it
hearing.
doesn't have to be exactly this, but we can certainly use this as a model. Jim Raymer usually will have some ways that he wants to tweak it to make sure that it meets legal requirements. But
Okay, if we were to take it to a vote, I have to remind you and ask for your advice that I own a building with guest quarters in it. And I have no interest in renting them. I don't see a conflict, but I would like to abstain from voting, so there's no concern in that regard. How do you feel about that?
I'm just curious why, not that we're rushing this, but why this needs to be brought up and switched right now as opposed to when we do the whole shebang.
Yep, fair question. How does everybody feel about that?
Well, if the intent is to create housing for workers, let's do it now, you know, if that's what we're trying to do. But if it's to let, I guess it's not as important to me if it's to allow people to stay for a 8-month summer rather than a short term. And as far as you voting on it, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I just. Vanessa, how do you feel about the speed and the, is it worth tackling this thing at this point, or?
Yeah, I thought we would tackle it together. But I defer, I mean, if we have a real housing crisis, I mean, I want to be sensitive to that. I mean, if we feel that we need to, you know, open up some of these dwellings so people can find homes because there's nothing on the market they can't afford. I want to be sensitive to that.
That has been our thought along, is that there is such demand, you know, for full-time year-round people that need a place to rent, a decent, safe, clean place to rent. And winter's coming, and, you know, we thought maybe a couple of these might, you know, a couple of owners might want to rent them. Maybe nobody will rent them, we don't know, but, you know, we could make it possible if we took action. So, but
I keep hearing that, you know, most of our people that work in restaurants and retail and the smaller jobs in the area, they're living in Wolverine and Vanderbilt and you know, across Village and Levering. And because of that, to me, this is an important thing to make it so, especially in the wintertime, you know, so they don't have to drive through 2 feet of snow to get to work. So there's some time.
And Rick, you have any
to
thoughts
this.
on the
Yeah, I've got
proceeding or?
one question here. It says here, short-term rentals of guest quarters would continue to be forbidden. At the last meeting, we were talking about something that's already happened, people moving into the guest quarters and renting out their main house. So I don't know if we need to go further on this one to make sure that doesn't happen more often. So that's my only concern.
Do we have language anywhere that says you can't do that?
Yeah, we discussed that at a previous meeting. Our language right now. Oh, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm hesitant to, but I brought this up at a previous meeting where we talked about this, and the gist of it is I do not believe that the zoning code permits it.
Okay.
Right? When we're talking about something like that, now we're talking about treating the property more as a duplex.
Yes.
As opposed to before. I will say that the proposed language that modifies the guest quarters structure would change my opinion on that. So right now, I don't think it's permitted. With this language change, I think that it would be permitted. Because we're removing the ability, right now, the language says you can't live and occupy that area for a period of time. And if you do, you can't reoccupy it for a period of time. We also say that it can't be rented. Now, if with these wording changes, we're changing that scenario. And I think it's just kind of an unintended consequence of what we're proposing to do here, unless we add some other language that would specifically address that scenario. Other than the fact that we are still talking about properties that are in a single family residential zone, but we're now talking about guest quarters or accessory dwelling units, whatever you want to call them, being on that property. This is done through a special land use, so that's still a high criteria to obtain. And we can monitor this through, you know, and future approvals with that in mind. But that is something that there is the potential, I think, that could happen to some extent, where somebody short-term rents their main house and chooses to live and
But they would
occupy
still
here.
need a license to do that. this doesn't change anything regarding getting a license. So,
Bill, can I just say about, you had asked about abstaining?
yes,
I don't think that's necessary. Because everyone here owns property, so any change, the planning commission makes that, any zoning code change the planning commission makes could affect their family, their property. So you can make an argue like, by allowing a fence or by allowing, maybe we pass this and then all 5 of you go by, they put accessory units on your property, and then you can say, financially benefit. So I don't think you have a need to abstain, just because you have this is what planning commission does. It makes land use regulations for the community. So as long as you make that clear and then the commission doesn't see a problem with you voting on it, I don't think you need to abstain.
Anybody at this table that lives in Harbor Springs could decide to apply for special land use and put in a guest quarters. So I don't think that anybody, you're being treated any differently than any other property owner.
That's when you'd abstain if you applied, you had already applied for it, so, yeah.
commissioners, how do you feel about?
I don't have a problem with you voting.
Sorry,
Yeah, I prefer you vote. It's fine.
Rick? No? Yep. All right. Thanks for that. And the question is, should we advance this thing tonight so that we can give it a thorough look at an upcoming meeting and get public input?
Well, I think what Rick said, that there's unintended consequences with some of the language, and can that be addressed before we move it forward?
That's the question.
Yeah, I think that's the idea Bill is getting at, is that at the October 20th meeting, we would present language that would address some of those concerns. And what Bill-
Yeah. And then if we don't like it, we don't have to
Okay.
take action. If you like it, we can move forward.
Okay.
Public's gonna tell us what they think about it as well. I don't see much of a downside to advancing. If you're willing.
Simple as having language added that states that if you have a guest quarters, you have.
Yeah, I think, I just want to make sure.
All right. Any other comments or questions, or should we put it to a vote? Would anyone like to make a motion to move this forward to next meeting and direct staff to prepare some additional language and get some public input?
I'll make that motion.
All right, motion's been made.
I'll second it.
It's been seconded,
Roll call vote.
please.
Rick Tarczynski. How about that? Yes. Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Emily DeVay,
Yes.
George P.
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Al Dyke.
Yes.
That's 6 yes votes, motion passes.
Al, this means you don't get to vote on it in December when you're on council.
All right, any other member comments? All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for coming for an extra meeting tonight.